Disclaimer: this is a fictional dramatization created for artistic, emotional, and educational storytelling purposes. All characters and events are entirely fictional and created using AI tools. No impersonation, misrepresentation, or harm is intended. The content contains scenes of danger involving child characters. However, no real persons or minors were involved in its production. Grace's Love Stories produces scripted, AI-generated stories that promote, entertain, inspire kindness, and emotional connection. We respect our viewers and strictly adhere to YouTube's policies.
The scent of drying lavender and beeswax should have been a comfort. It was the scent of her home, the scent of her life, the scent she had built day by day inside the cold stone heart of the Alpha King's fortress. But today, it was the scent of a tomb. Iris Feld's fingers hovered over a silver vase, her voice a low, steady murmur in the cavernous receiving hall. No, it belongs on the west mantle. The morning light catches the engravings there. She didn't finish. A soft, melodic voice cut through her own. The light is better on the east, my king. It reflects the gold in the tapestries. The words weren't a suggestion. They were a correction, confident, final. Iris froze. Her pulse stumbled. The air in her lungs turned to glass. Another Omega, a woman named Rena, with eyes like polished obsidian, stepped past her. Her movements were fluid, graceful, a dance of ownership in a hall that was not her own. She lifted the heavy silver vase from Iris's grasp, as if taking back something that had only been borrowed. Her touch was brief, dismissive. Iris's gaze shot to the man standing by the hearth. Alpha King Corin Ashen. He watched. He did not move. He did not speak. His stillness was an answer more brutal than any word. His granite gray eyes were fixed on the vase, on Rena's hands, not on the woman whose life was being rearranged before him. A deep primal cold began to seep into Iris's bones. This was not the first time. The realization didn't strike like lightning. It flooded her, a slow, drowning tide of memories. A misplaced book she was sure she had shelved. A change in the dinner menu she hadn't ordered. The scent of Rena's cloying rose perfume clinging to the furs on Corin's ceremonial chair. Each one a tiny crack in the foundation of her world. Now the entire structure was groaning, ready to collapse. Rena placed the vase on the east mantle. The silver caught the light exactly as she'd said it would, casting a warm, golden glow across the stone. It looked perfect. It looked like it had always belonged there, as if it were her own idea. Corin's lips tilted, a bare millimeter of approval. It was a look Iris had spent a decade trying to earn. A look Rena had just commanded with a single, effortless sentence. The silence that followed was immense. It was a living thing, a predator in the room, and its teeth were sinking into Iris's throat. She could hear the crackle of the fire in the hearth, the distant cry of a hawk circling the battlements, the frantic, terrified drumming of her own heart. She had lived in his silence for years. She had learned its language, its textures. There was the silence of rage, thin and sharp. The silence of contemplation, deep and heavy. This was a silence she had never known. It was the silence of erasure. Finally, as if sensing the unbearable weight of it, Corin turned his head. His gaze swept over her, cool and appraising. There was no flicker of warmth, no apology, nothing. It was the look a king gave a servant who had outlived her usefulness. "Is there a problem, Iris?" His voice was low, a rumble of stone and winter. It was the voice that brought armies to their knees, the voice that had once whispered her name in the dark. Her throat was tight. Words were stones she couldn't lift. She just shook her head, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement. Because the problem wasn't the vase. The problem was the certainty in Rena's eyes. The problem was the way she stood near the Alpha King, not as a guest, but as a fixture. The problem was the invisible thread of understanding that passed between them, leaving Iris on the outside, shivering in a cold she couldn't name. Rena smiled, a gentle, knowing curve of her lips. She looked at Iris, a flicker of something that might have been pity in her dark eyes. The king prefers balance, symmetry. It takes time to learn his ways. The condescension was a slap. "I have lived his ways for 10 years, Iris screamed in her mind. I have breathed his moods, mapped his scars, and warmed his bed. This house is built on what I have learned of him." But her lips did not move. Her body was a statue of ice. Corin gave a slight nod. "Rena has a keen eye." He said it to the room, to the air, but it was a verdict delivered directly to Iris's soul. He was dismissing her, in her own home. The king's scent, a powerful mix of pine, cold iron, and storm-charged air, had always been her anchor. It was the scent of safety, of power, of belonging. Now, it was suffocating. It mingled with Rena's overpowering rose, creating a cloying, sickly aroma that made her stomach churn. Her own scent, rain and chamomile, a quiet fragrance he'd once said was the only peace he knew, felt faint, fading, utterly insignificant. She was an omega. Her purpose was to create harmony, to soften the brutal edges of an alpha's world. She had dedicated her life to it, to him, and he had allowed another to do it better, to do it right in front of her. "I was not aware," Iris managed, her voice a dry whisper, a rustle of dead leaves. Corin's jaw tightened. A flicker of impatience crossed his face. He hated explanations. He hated weakness. And in that moment, she was nothing but weakness. "Now you are," he said. The words were flat, final. He took a step toward the grand doors, his heavy leather boots echoing on the stone floor. Each footfall was a hammer blow against Iris's breaking heart. He didn't look back. He didn't offer a hand. He didn't offer a single glance of reassurance. Rena remained for a moment, her gaze still on Iris. She smoothed a hand down her simple wool dress, a gesture of quiet confidence. She was everything Iris was not. Bold where Iris was reserved, certain where Iris was hesitant. "Don't feel ashamed," Rena said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial softness. "It is a great honor to serve him, in any capacity." Serve him, the word hung in the air between them. Not love him, not be his queen, serve. Iris finally found her breath. It came out in a ragged, shaking gasp. "This is my home." Rena's smile tightened, losing all its warmth. "A home is where the alpha is, Iris. It is not a place of stone and wood. It is a place of purpose. You would do well to remember that." And then she turned, her footsteps light and quick as she followed her king, leaving Iris alone in the vast, silent hall. Alone with a vase that was in the wrong place. Alone with the scent of another woman who had taken hers. Iris stood there for a long time, unable to move. The fire crackled. The light from the east window bathed the room in gold. Everything looked beautiful. Everything looked perfect. A perfectly constructed lie. She walked on numb feet toward the mantelpiece, the one Rena had chosen. She reached out a trembling hand, her fingers tracing the cold, smooth silver of the vase. It was an antique, a gift from a visiting dignitary from the southern Pax. Iris had been the one to receive it, to thank them on Corin's behalf. She remembered the weight of it in her hands, the pride she'd felt. Now it felt like a stranger's possession. Her reflection stared back at her from the polished surface. A pale, wide-eyed woman with hair the color of autumn leaves. A woman of 28 who looked a decade older in the harsh, unforgiving light. The Queen of the Ashen Throne, a title she had worn like a heavy, ill-fitting cloak. She was a Baron Omega, wolfless. A political match made to secure a treaty with her weak, crumbling pack 10 years ago. She had known her position was precarious. She had always known, but she had believed. She had dared to hope that she had built something real in the spaces between the lines of that treaty, a life, a partnership, something that resembled love. What a fool she had been. The betrayal wasn't a single act. It wasn't a moment of weakness. It was a strategy, a quiet, calculated replacement. She hadn't been his queen. She had been a placeholder, a steward, keeping the castle warm until the true mistress arrived. Her gaze drifted from the vase to the grand doors through which he had disappeared. She felt for the bond between them, that ethereal connection that was supposed to tie an alpha to his mate. For years, it had been a faint, humming thread, something she cherished in the quiet of the night. Now, when she reached for it, she felt nothing, only a cold, hollow void where it used to be. The silence of the hall pressed in on her, no longer empty, but filled with the ghosts of a decade of lies. His quiet praise for a meal Rena must have suggested. His rare smiles at a joke Rena must have told him. He hadn't just brought another woman into his bed. He had brought her into their life, piece by piece, until there was no room left for Iris at all. Her feet moved without instruction. One step, then another, carrying her away from the golden light of the receiving hall, into the long, shadowed corridors of the fortress. The tapestries that lined the walls, depicting the great hunts and battles of the Ashen lineage, seemed to watch her with woven, indifferent eyes. She had chosen each one, supervised their hanging, learned the stories they told. Now they were telling a new story, her story, a tale of an Omega Queen who had become a ghost in her own home. Every surface was a cold mirror. The polished oak of a table showed her a stooped, hazy figure. A pane of glass in an arched window reflected a woman with hollowed cheeks and haunted eyes. Then the silver buttons on a guard's tunic threw back a distorted, fractured image of her face as she passed. She saw herself, but she did not recognize the woman staring back. The castle was a labyrinth of memories, and every corner was now a trap. There was the alcove where Corin had first kissed her, his lips surprisingly gentle against hers, his scent of pine and winter air, a wild, intoxicating promise. She stumbled as she passed it, the memory sharp enough to draw blood. There was the library where they had spent long nights reading by the fire, his massive frame folded into a chair too small for him, her head resting on his knee. He had told her once, his voice a low rumble against her ear, that the silence they shared was more profound than any words. He had built her a kingdom of silence, and then used it to suffocate her. Her hand trembled as she reached for the iron handle of her chamber door. This was her sanctuary, the one place in the sprawling, formidable fortress that was hers alone. The air inside should smell of her, of chamomile and dried herbs, and the rain-washed scent of her own skin. She pushed the door open and froze. The air was wrong. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there. A sweet, cloying note hiding beneath the familiar scents of her room. Rose, Rena's scent. It was an invasion, a violation, a quiet declaration that no part of this life was sacred. No part of it was truly hers. Her breath hitched. Her gaze swept the room, hungry for evidence, for something solid to hold on to in the drowning tide of betrayal. At first, everything seemed the same. The heavy fur blankets were folded neatly on the bed she had shared with Corin for a decade. The worn wooden chest at its foot was closed. The silver-backed brush she used on her hair sat on the vanity, exactly where she had left it this morning. But her eyes were different now. They saw the lies. A book of poetry on the bedside table was open to a different page. A new candle, one she hadn't purchased, sat on the mantelpiece, its wick black with recent use. A small, almost invisible detail. A detail designed to be overlooked, but not by her, not anymore. She was the woman who knew that the morning light hit the west mantle. She was the woman who noticed everything. It was her gift and her curse. It was how she had survived in this court of stone and secrets for so long. And it was how she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the marrow, that Rena had been in here, in her bed. Her legs felt weak, unsteady. She moved toward the large, carved wardrobe that held her simple dresses of wool and linen. She was a practical queen for a practical king. No silks, no velvets. Corin had always said he preferred the simple honesty of the cloth. Another lie, all of it. Her fingers closed around the cold iron handle of the wardrobe door. She pulled. The scent of rose washed over her, stronger now, clinging to the wood and the fabric within. And there, hanging amongst her muted grays and blues and earthy greens, was a slash of crimson, a dress of shimmering blood-red silk. It was exquisite, cut low in the front, with delicate sleeves that would leave a woman's arms bare. It was a dress made for a woman who was not afraid to be seen. A dress made for a woman who was confident in her power, in her allure. A dress made for Rena. Iris reached out a trembling hand and touched the fabric. It was cool and smooth beneath her fingertips, impossibly fine. It felt like sin, it felt like triumph. It was the physical proof of her replacement. Not just in the hall, not just at the dinner table, but here, in the most intimate space of her life. The grief in her chest, a vast aching sea, began to freeze over. The pain was so immense, so absolute, that it became something else, something hard and sharp and cold. Anger. A quiet, desolate anger that held no heat. It was the anger of a winter river, frozen on the surface but with a deadly current running beneath. She had given this man everything: her loyalty, her body, her heart. She had managed his household, entertained his vassals, and soothed his rages. She had been the perfect, silent, wolfless queen, a queen who asked for nothing, who was grateful for the scraps of affection he threw her way. And he had repaid her by turning her home into a cage and her marriage into a lie. He hadn't even had the decency to be discreet. The arrogance of it was breathtaking. He had let it happen right in front of her, day by day, cut by cut, until she was bleeding out in plain sight. He hadn't just been unfaithful, he had been cruel. She closed the wardrobe door, the soft click echoing the sound of something breaking inside her. She had been taught her whole life that an Omega's worth was in her ability to please her Alpha, to create a home, to bear children. She was barren, wolfless, defective. She had tried to make up for it with flawless devotion. It hadn't been enough. It was never going to be enough. She looked around the room, at the life she had so carefully constructed. The illusion shattered, and all she saw were props on a stage, a play in which her role had been recast. A heavy footstep sounded in the corridor outside, then another. Her pulse leaped into her throat, a frantic trapped bird. She knew that tread. The solid, unhurried gait of a king who owned the very stones beneath his feet. Corin. He was coming here. To her room, to their room. The scent of pine and cold iron grew stronger, seeping under the door. It no longer felt like safety. It felt like the approach of a storm that had come to sweep away the last remnants of her life. He stopped just outside the door. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. He didn't knock. He never did. He was the king. He did not ask for permission to enter. Iris stood perfectly still, her back to the wardrobe that held the crimson secret. She stared at the heavy oak door, her heart hammering against her ribs. This was it. The confrontation she had unknowingly been walking toward for months, for years. She had two choices. She could shatter, fall to her knees, and demand answers he would never give. She could become the weeping, hysterical queen she had always refused to be. Or she could be ice. She could be stone. She could be the fortress around her. The latch clicked. The sound was deafening in the silence. It was the sound of the world holding its breath. She lifted her chin, the movement small but deliberate. He would not find her broken, not yet. He had taken her home, her husband, her future. He would not take her pride. The door began to swing inward, and she looked at the man who held her life in his hands, knowing with chilling certainty he was about to let go. He filled the doorway, not just with his size, which was immense, a solid wall of muscle and leather and royal authority, but with his presence. The air in the room grew colder, heavier. The flames in the hearth seemed to shrink away from him. Alpha King Corin Ashen's eyes, the color of a storm-tossed sea, found hers across the room. They held no warmth, no apology, only a flat, weary assessment. He had not come for a reconciliation. He had come to finish a task. Her heart, which had been hammering against her ribs, slowed to a heavy, painful thud. Each beat was a reminder of the life draining out of her. She met his gaze, holding it, refusing to be the first to look away. For 10 years, she had deferred to him in all things. She had lowered her eyes, softened her voice, made herself smaller to fit into the vast space he occupied. Not this time. She stood straight, her hands clasped loosely behind her back, her posture mimicking the queen's in the tapestries, regal, unbroken, a lie she would hold until her last breath. His scent washed over her, pine, iron, and the sharp, clean smell of ozone after a lightning strike. It was the scent of power, of command, but underneath it, so faint she almost missed it, was the ghost of another fragrance. Rose. It clung to the leather of his tunic. It was in the air he breathed. He had come from Rena. The knowledge was a cold, sharp blade twisting in her gut. She did not flinch. She did not allow the agony to show on her face. She had become a master of hiding her feelings, and now that skill was the only armor she had left. Corin closed the door behind him. The soft click of the latch was a sound of finality. They were alone, trapped in the ruins of what they had built. He walked toward the center of the room, his movement slow, deliberate. He did not look at her, but around her, at the room itself. His gaze swept over the familiar objects, the worn armchair by the fire, the tapestry she had mended with her own hands, the bed that had been their world. Was he seeing it for the last time? Or was he seeing it through new eyes, Rena's eyes, and finding it wanting? "Iris," he began, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. He stopped, as if the name itself was an unfamiliar weight on his tongue. She remained silent. She would not make this easy for him. She would not fill the suffocating space between his words with her own quiet reassurances, as she had always done. Let him struggle with the silence. Let him feel, for once, the crushing weight of it. He finally looked at her, his jaw tight. A muscle ticked beneath the scarred skin of his cheek. It was an old wound, a souvenir from the war that had made him king. She had tended that scar, traced it with her fingers in the dark, learned its story. It was a part of him she had thought she knew. Now he was just a man with a scar. A stranger. "Things are changing," he said. It was not an apology, it was a statement of fact, as undeniable as the setting of the sun. "I have noticed," she replied, her voice steady, cool. She surprised herself with its strength. It was the voice of a queen, not a heartbroken Omega. His eyes narrowed. He was not used to this from her. He was used to compliance, to a soft, yielding nature that bent to his will. The woman standing before him was made of something else, something forged in the cold fire of his betrayal. "Rena has a different perspective," he continued, choosing his words with care. "She sees what this kingdom needs to become: strength, clarity, a future." Each word was a careful, deliberate blow. Strength, because she, the wolfless Omega, was weak. Clarity, because her quiet, gentle ways were muddled and ineffective. A future, because she, the barren queen, could not provide one. He was dismantling her, piece by piece, with the cold precision of a skilled executioner. He was telling her, without ever saying the words, that she was obsolete. "And what is my perspective to you, Corin?" she asked, the question sharp, clean. "After 10 years, what am I?" He had the grace to look uncomfortable. His gaze shifted away from hers toward the fire. "You have served this kingdom well, Iris. You have been dutiful." Dutiful, the word was an insult. A dog was dutiful, a servant was dutiful. A wife, a queen, a mate, she was supposed to be more. She was supposed to be cherished. The ice around her heart cracked, and a flare of hot, searing rage burned through her. "I was your wife," she said, her voice shaking with the effort of keeping it level. "You are," he corrected, but the word held no conviction. It was a hollow echo of a vow made long ago, a vow made of politics and treaties, not love. A vow he was now preparing to break. For how much longer? The question hung between them, shimmering with a decade of unspoken truths. He was silent for a long moment. He ran a hand over his face, a gesture of weariness she knew well. It was the gesture he made when faced with an impossible decision on the battlefield. He was treating their marriage like a war he was determined to win. "The council is concerned," he said, his voice regaining its familiar authoritative tone. He was on firmer ground now, talking of politics and duty. "There is no heir. Your pack is weak, unable to offer the support we need at the border. Our alliance, it no longer serves its purpose. So I am to be set aside, like a treaty that is no longer convenient? It is not that simple." "It seems perfectly simple to me," she countered, and took a step forward. Her scent, chamomile and rain, rose in the air, a quiet protest against the invading fragrance of rose. "You have found a new Omega, one who is not barren, one who can give you the future I cannot." His head snapped up, his eyes flashing with a dangerous light. "Do not speak of things you do not understand." "Oh, I understand," she said, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "I understand perfectly. I understand the scent of her on your clothes. I understand the crimson dress hanging in my wardrobe." The blood drained from his face. He hadn't known about the dress. Rena had put it there, a silent, cruel message from one woman to another. A mark of territory. Corin took a step toward the wardrobe, his hand reaching for the handle, Don't, Iris commanded, her voice ringing with an authority she didn't know she possessed. He froze, his hand hovering in the air. He turned to look at her, and for the first time, she saw something other than cold dismissal in his eyes. She saw a flicker of something, shock, guilt. It didn't matter, it was too late. She has been in this room, Iris stated, her voice dropping to a low, trembling whisper. In our bed. She has touched my things. She has laid claim to my life. And you allowed it. Iris. He took a step toward her, his hand outstretched. She recoiled as if he were fire. Do not touch me. His hand dropped to his side. The look on his face was unreadable. He was a king. He was not used to being denied. He was not used to being held accountable. I have given you everything, she whispered, the words tearing from her throat. I have quieted your rages. I have healed your wounds. I have stood by you when your own counsel whispered that a wolfless Omega was a curse on your throne. I have loved you when you were unlovable. The raw, bleeding truth of her words filled the space between them. He looked away, unable to meet her gaze. He stared into the fire, his profile carved from stone and shadow. The kingdom must survive, he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. My lineage must continue. It is my duty. It is a burden I cannot set aside for sentiment. Sentiment. That was all she was to him. 10 years of her life, her love, her unwavering loyalty reduced to a single dismissive word. The fight went out of her, the anger, the grief, the desperate need to make him see, it all evaporated, leaving behind a vast, hollow emptiness. She was nothing to him. She had always been nothing. I see, she said, her voice completely calm. The storm had passed, leaving a dead, frozen stillness in its wake. Then there is nothing more to say. She turned and walked toward the vanity. She picked up the silver-backed brush, her movements graceful, unhurried. She began to brush her hair, the long autumn-colored strands crackling in the dry air. 1 stroke, 2, 3. Corin watched her, his brow furrowed in confusion. He had expected tears, he had expected screams, he had expected a fight. He did not know what to do with this strange, silent woman who looked at him as if he were a stranger she had just met on the road. What are you doing, Mas? He asked, his voice rough. I am preparing for the evening, she replied, her voice soft, melodic. As I always do. She was showing him that he could not break her. He could take her title, her home, her husband. But he could not take the quiet dignity that was all she had left. She was the queen of this castle. She would act like one until the moment they ripped the crown from her head. He stared at her for a long moment, his gray eyes searching for a crack in her composure. He found none. With a low, frustrated growl, he turned and strode from the room, slamming the heavy door behind him. The sound echoed through the chamber. Iris stopped brushing her hair. The silver brush fell from her nerveless fingers, clattering onto the stone floor. Her legs gave out, and she sank to her knees, a single silent tear tracing a path through the dust on her cheek. The scent of a forgotten vow filled the air, and it smelled of ash. The fortress was a tomb of whispers. As Iris walked the corridors in the days that followed, the silence she had once cherished became a weapon. It was filled with the things no one would say to her face. The averted eyes of the guards, the hushed conversations of servants that fell silent the moment she rounded a corner, the pitying glances from the elder ladies of the court. She was no longer their queen. She was a living relic, a ghost haunting the halls of a life that was no longer hers. Rena was everywhere now, not in the shadows, but in the full, bright light of day. She stood beside Corin during his morning audiences, her hand resting possessively on his arm. She walked the gardens, giving orders to the gardeners about the placement of new rose bushes. Her laughter, a sound like silver bells, echoed in the great hall where Iris's quiet voice had once held sway. She was the sun, brilliant and bold, and Iris was the fading moon, visible only in the moments before she was completely erased from the sky. Corin did not speak to her. He did not look at her. He moved through the world as if she had already ceased to exist. He had passed his sentence in the cold silence of their chamber, and now he was simply waiting for it to be carried out. The final humiliation came during the Feast of the Winter Moon, the most sacred celebration of their people. It was a night of renewal, of honoring the bond between an alpha and his pack, between a king and his queen. For 10 years, Iris had sat at Corin's right hand, the place of honor. Tonight, the chair was occupied by Rena. She wore the crimson silk dress. It shimmered in the torchlight, a flag of victory planted in the heart of Iris's defeat. The lords and ladies of the court, men and women who had sworn fealty to Iris, now bowed their heads to the usurper. Their loyalty, like Corin's love, had been a thing of convenience. Iris was relegated to a seat far down the table, among the lesser cousins and aging widows. She was an afterthought, a piece of furniture that had not yet been moved to the attic. She watched Corin as he presided over the feast. He laughed at something Rena whispered in his ear, his head tilted toward hers, a gesture of intimacy that was a physical blow to Iris. He placed a piece of roasted meat on her plate with his own dagger, a sign of profound favor. He did not look at Iris once. The food on her plate turned to ash in her mouth. The wine tasted of dust. The sounds of celebration, the music, the laughter, the boasting of the warriors, were a dull, meaningless roar in her ears. Her world had shrunk to the space between her own stuttering heartbeats. She felt a presence at her side and turned. It was Anwen, an old Omega who had served as her handmaiden since she had first arrived at the fortress as a young, frightened bride. Anwen's face, a roadmap of wrinkles and worry, was etched with a deep, sorrowful pity. "My queen," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the din. "You do not have to endure this." "I am not your queen anymore, Anwen," Iris replied, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. "I am a ghost at a feast." "You are Iris of the Feld clan," the old woman insisted, her gnarled hand covering Iris's on the table. Her touch was warm, a small point of heat in the encroaching ice. "You have a strength the king has forgotten, the strength of the quiet earth. It endures the winter. It waits for the spring, but there would be no spring for her. There was only this endless, bitter winter." She looked back at the head table, at Corin, at the woman who had taken her place. She saw the way Rena's scent, that cloying, triumphant rose, wafted toward the king, enveloping him. She saw the way his own powerful scent of pine and iron seemed to welcome it, to intertwine with it. They were a perfect match, a storm and a hothouse flower. And she, with her scent of rain and chamomile, was just a forgotten field after a harvest. Something inside her, something that had been holding on with the last of its strength, finally broke. She could not stay here. She could not watch this. She could not breathe this air, thick with her own erasure. Without a word, she rose from her seat. The movement was so quiet, so devoid of drama, that at first, no one noticed. She turned her back on the feast, on the whispers, on the 10 years of her life that were now being publicly dismantled. She walked out of the great hall, her head held high, her back straight. She did not run. She did not weep. She simply left. As she passed through the great arched doorway, she felt a sudden, sharp pressure behind her eyes. A jolt, as if a thread that had been stretched to its breaking point had finally snapped. Corin. He had felt her leave. Across the cacophony of the hall, through the scents of roasted meat and spilled wine and 100 breathing bodies, he had felt the severing of their bond. Faint as it was, it had still been there, a ghost of a connection, a memory of a vow. And now, it was gone. She did not turn back. She kept walking, her footsteps echoing in the empty corridor. She walked past the tapestries, past the alcove where he had kissed her, past the library where they had shared their silence. Each step was a farewell. She went to her chamber. His scent was still there, a faint, lingering trace of pine and regret. And under it, the triumphant rose. She moved with a calm, deliberate purpose. She took nothing that belonged to the Queen of the Ashen Throne, no jewels, no fine clothes. She packed a small leather satchel with the simple wool dress she had arrived in 10 years ago, a loaf of bread and a skin of water from the kitchen, and the small worn book of folk tales her mother had given her. She looked at her reflection in the silver mirror one last time. The woman who stared back was no one. She had no title, no husband, no home. She was just Iris. And for the first time in a decade, the thought was not terrifying. It was freeing. She slipped out of the fortress through a small postern gate used by the servants. The cold night air was a shock to her lungs. It smelled of snow and damp earth and the vast, empty wilderness. It smelled of freedom. The full winter moon hung in the sky, a perfect silver disk. It bathed the world in a cold, ethereal light. It was the moon of her culling, the moon that had seen her shamed, her mate taken, her life destroyed. But tonight, it did not feel like an enemy. It felt like a guide. She turned her face toward the dark, brooding line of the forest that bordered the kingdom, the Whisperwood, a place of old magic and older dangers, a place no one from the fortress ever dared to enter. It was the place her feet were taking her. She did not know what she would find there. Shelter, death. It didn't matter. Anything was better than the slow, suffocating death she had been dying in the king's castle. As she took her first step onto the path that led into the trees, a howl ripped through the night. It was a sound of pure, primal agony, a sound of loss, of rage, of a soul being torn in two. It was Corin. He had shifted. He had let the wolf out. A thing he rarely did. A thing he only did when the man could no longer contain the beast within. The sound clawed at her, a physical force that tried to pull her back. A desperate, primal call from an alpha to his mate. Mine. The word was not spoken, but she felt it in her bones. An echo in her blood, a ghost of a claim he no longer had the right to make. Her breath hitched. For a single shattering moment, she wanted to turn back. She wanted to run back to the source of that sound, to the beast who was her husband, and soothe his pain, as she had always done. But the beast had a new keeper now, Rena with her scent of roses and her blood-red dress. Iris turned her back on the sound of his grief. She pulled the hood of her cloak over her head, hiding herself from the light of the unforgiving moon, and she walked into the darkness of the woods, toward an unknown future, leaving the man who had broken her heart to howl his regret to the silent, watching stars. She didn't know that deep within the forest, something ancient and powerful had been sleeping, and the sound of a king's broken heart had just woken it up. The forest swallowed her whole. One moment she was on the edge of the king's lands, the moonlight painting the path silver. The next, the canopy of ancient black-barked trees closed over her head, and the world became a labyrinth of shadow and sound. The air was different here, heavy, primal. It smelled of damp soil, decaying leaves, and something else, something wild and musky that made the fine hairs on her arms stand on end. This was the Whisperwood, a place spoken of in hushed, frightened tones in the castle, a place of myth, a place of monsters. Iris was not afraid. Fear was a luxury for those who had something left to lose. She walked for hours, her feet finding a path that wasn't there. The thin soles of her leather shoes were no match for the gnarled roots and sharp stones, but she barely felt the pain. The agony in her heart was a roaring fire that consumed all lesser hurts. Corin's howl had faded, but it echoed in her memory. A sound of a beast in a trap of its own making. A part of her, the omega part that had been bred for a century to soothe and submit, ached to answer it. But the woman, the one who had been erased and discarded, kept walking deeper into the dark. The forest was not silent. It was alive with a language she was only just beginning to understand. The snap of a twig to her left, the low, mournful hoot of an owl overhead, the rustle of some small creature in the undergrowth. Every sound was a word, a warning, a question. "Who are you?" the forest seemed to ask. "Why have you come to this broken, forgotten place?" "I am broken and forgotten too," she whispered to the trees, her breath pluming in the frigid air. She found a small, sheltered hollow beneath the roots of a giant oak, its branches like skeletal arms reaching for the slivers of moon. Exhaustion, a force more powerful than grief, finally claimed her. She curled into a tight ball, her thin cloak her only shield against the biting cold, and fell into a dreamless, heavy sleep. She awoke to the feeling of being watched. Her eyes snapped open. The first light of dawn was filtering through the canopy, painting the forest in shades of gray and silver. The air was still, too still. The normal sounds of the woods, the birds, the insects, had fallen silent. A predator was near. Slowly, carefully, she sat up. Her heart was a cold, hard knot in her chest. She scanned the trees around her, her gaze searching the deep shadows, and then she saw them. Eyes. 2 points of molten gold, glowing with an unnatural intensity from the darkness of a thicket not 20 paces away. They were not the eyes of a deer or a fox. They were the eyes of something ancient and intelligent, something that had been waiting for her. She froze. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but she was pinned by that unblinking, luminous gaze. This was it. This was the monster the stories warned of. This was how her story would end, not as a queen, but as prey. A low growl rumbled from the thicket, a sound that vibrated not in her ears, but in the bones of her chest. It was not a sound of aggression, it was a question. The creature stepped out of the shadows. Iris's breath caught in her throat. It was a wolf, but it was unlike any wolf she had ever seen. It was enormous, its shoulders as high as her waist, its body a corded mass of muscle beneath a coat of fur the color of midnight. But it was the wolf's aura that stole her breath. Power radiated from it in palpable waves, a wild, untamed magic that made the air hum. This was no mere animal. This was a king of a different, older court. And it was scarred. A long, jagged line of silver tissue ran from its left eye down to its jaw, pulling the lip into a permanent snarl. Old wounds, healed but not forgotten, crisscrossed its powerful flanks. This was a creature that had survived battles she could not even imagine. The great wolf took another step forward, its golden eyes never leaving her face. It lowered its massive head and sniffed the air, its black nose twitching. Iris remained perfectly still. She could smell it now, a scent as powerful and complex as the forest itself. Wet earth, lightning-struck pine, and a deep, coiling musk of ancient power. There was no trace of another pack, no mark of an alpha. This creature was a law unto itself. It took another step, and another, until it was standing just a few feet away from her. Its sheer size was overwhelming. Its presence was a physical weight. But she did not feel fear. She felt recognition. In the depths of those molten gold eyes, she saw a reflection of her own soul. She saw the loneliness. She saw the scars. She saw the quiet, enduring strength of a survivor. She did her own name, Iris, a quiet flower, no one special, forgotten easily. But she was not her namesake. A flower crushed so easily. A flower which lives only in spring. No, she was a survivor. She slowly, deliberately held out her hand, palm up, a gesture of peace, an offering of trust in a world that had taught her to trust no one. The wolf watched the movement, its head cocked. It did not flinch. It did not growl. It simply observed her with that unnerving, ancient intelligence. After a long moment, it took the final step and lowered its head. Its wet nose nudged her palm. The touch was electric. A jolt of energy, warm and wild, shot up her arm and straight into her heart. It was a feeling of connection so profound, so absolute, that it brought tears to her eyes. It was the bond she had craved her entire life, the one Corin had never been able to give her. A bond not of politics or duty, but of shared wounds. A low whine escaped the wolf's throat, a sound of deep, empathetic sorrow. It knew. Somehow, this ancient, magical creature knew every pain, every betrayal, every silent scream that she had carried in her heart. It licked her hand, its rough tongue rasping against her skin, and in that simple animal gesture, she felt more acceptance than she had known in 10 years as a queen. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. The wolf lifted its head and looked deep into her eyes, and for a fleeting, impossible second, the golden depths swirled, and she saw not a wolf, but a man with the same haunted golden eyes, the same jagged scar running down his face. A man whose soul was as scarred and as wild as the beast. The vision vanished as quickly as it came, leaving her breathless and shaking. A shifter, but not like the shifters she knew. Corin's wolf was a part of him, an extension of his power. This was different. The wolf and the man were one and the same, two halves of a single broken whole. The sound of snapping branches and harsh, commanding voices shattered the sacred silence. "Spread out, the king wants her found! Alive!" Pack warriors, Corin's men. The great wolf's head shot up, a deep, guttural growl tearing from its chest. The fur along its spine bristled. Its protective stance over her was instantaneous, absolute. They had found her. Corin had sent his hunters to drag her back to her cage. No, Iris whispered, her hand closing into a fist. I won't go back. She looked at the scarred, magnificent creature beside her, at the raw, untamed power it represented. She had a choice. She could surrender, go back to the fortress, and accept whatever fate Corin and his new mate decided for her. A quiet banishment, a life locked in a tower, a convenient accident. Or she could choose this, the wild, the unknown. The wolf with the soul of a broken king. Help me, she pleaded, her voice finding a strength she didn't know it had. She looked into the wolf's golden eyes. Don't let them take me. The wolf's gaze held hers, and in it she saw a silent vow. It would not let them have her. It would protect her. This broken, wolfless Omega had found a guardian in the heart of the Whisperwood. The sounds of the search party grew closer. Shouts, the jangle of armor, the scent of pack wolves, so different from the wild, earthy scent of her protector. The great wolf nudged her, a firm pressure against her side, urging her to her feet. It turned and gave a soft bark, a clear command. Follow me. Without a moment's hesitation, Iris obeyed. She ran, her feet flying over the forest floor, her lungs burning with the cold air. Beside her, the great wolf moved like a silent black shadow, its powerful legs eating up the ground. She did not look back. She ran toward a future she could not see, with a creature she did not know, leaving the life that had tried to destroy her behind. As she plunged deeper into the heart of the ancient forest, she felt it again, that strange electric hum in her blood, a forgotten magic stirring in the depths of her soul. The forest had not just offered her a guardian, it was offering her a gift. The gift she had been denied her entire life, a wolf of her own. The hunt was relentless. For days, they moved through the Whisperwood, a silent Omega and her giant, shadow-pelted guardian. Corin's warriors were skilled trackers, their senses sharp, their determination fueled by the raw, desperate command of their alpha king. Iris could hear their calls in the distance, could smell the scent of their tamed wolves on the wind, a scent of iron and obedience that felt alien in this wild, untamed place. But the forest was on her side. Her guide, the great scarred wolf she had come to think of as Shadow, knew every secret path, every hidden stream that would mask their scent, every ancient hollow log that could serve as a temporary refuge. He moved with the quiet confidence of a creature who was not merely in the forest, but of it. He was its heart, its will. They communicated without words. A nudge of his head indicated the direction. A low growl was a warning to be still. A soft whine in the dead of night was a question. Are you all right? She would rest her hand on his thick midnight fur, and the answer would pass between them, a silent reassurance that they were not alone. In the quiet moments, huddled by a smokeless fire, he showed her how to build. She would study him. The jagged scar that marred his handsome lupine face was not a mark of weakness, but a testament to his strength. It was a map of survival. She found herself tracing its path with her eyes, wondering at the battle that had created it, at the pain he had endured. He would watch her in turn, his molten gold eyes seeming to see past her skin, past the years of training and repression, into the core of who she was. He saw the wolfless Omega, yes, but he did not see her as broken. He saw her as waiting. Something was changing inside her. The air of the Whisperwood, thick with old magic, was seeping into her pores, waking up parts of her she never knew existed. Her senses, always sharp, were becoming preternaturally keen. She could smell the coming rain hours before the clouds gathered. She could hear the heartbeat of a mouse hiding in the leaves a dozen paces away. She could feel the life force of the great trees around her, a slow, deep thrumming that resonated in her own chest. The wolfless girl was finding her pack, and it was the forest itself. One evening, as a cold, biting rain began to fall, Shadow led her to a place she never would have found on her own. A narrow crevice, almost completely hidden by a curtain of ancient ivy, opened into a deep, dry cave. The air inside was still and warm, and a small, clear spring bubbled up from the stone floor in the back. It was a sanctuary. As she collapsed onto the sandy floor, her body aching with a weariness that went bone deep, Shadow nudged the small leather satchel she carried. It was a gentle but insistent gesture. Confused, she opened it. The loaf of bread was gone, eaten days ago. All that remained was the small, worn book of folk tales from her mother. She pulled it out, her fingers tracing the faded gold lettering on the cover. Tales of the First Wolves. She hadn't looked at it in years. Corin had dismissed these stories as Omega fantasies, tales of a magic that no longer existed in their practical, brutal world. Shadow whined softly, his gaze fixed on the book. Understanding dawned. He wanted her to read. Her voice was hoarse at first, unused to speaking more than a few whispered words. But as she began to read the old familiar stories, it grew stronger. She read of the time before packs and alphas, when all shifters could speak to the forest, when the bond between a wolf and its human was a sacred magical bridge. She read of the silent ones, Omegas born without a wolf of their own, who were not considered cursed, but blessed. They were the keepers of the old ways, the conduits through which the magic of the earth flowed. They were not weak. They were the heart of the pack, the anchor that kept their wilder brethren from losing themselves to the beast. And she read of the first wolf, a great scarred shifter spirit who was the guardian of the Whisperwood, a king of a forgotten age who would only reveal himself to one who was pure of heart and truly lost. Her voice faltered. She looked up from the page, her eyes wide with a dawning, impossible realization. She stared at the giant wolf lying before her, at the jagged silver scar that was a perfect match for the one described in the ancient text. "It's you," she whispered, her voice filled with awe. "You're him, the guardian." The great wolf huffed, a sound that was almost a laugh, and rested its massive head on its paws, its golden eyes gleaming in the firelight. The truth settled over her, not with a crash, but with a quiet, profound sense of homecoming. She was not cursed. She was not broken. She was a silent one. Her wolflessness was not an absence, but a space waiting to be filled. The magic of the Whisperwood had been calling to her for years, a faint whisper on the edge of her senses, and her flight from the fortress had finally allowed her to hear it. She had not been running away from her life. She had been running toward her destiny. At that moment, a new scent hit the air outside the cave. Sharp, urgent. Corin. He was close, closer than he had ever been. He was no longer hunting with his pack. He was hunting alone. The scent was raw, wild, edged with a desperation that was terrifying in its intensity. This was not the king. This was the alpha, the beast. And he was hunting for his mate. Shadow was on his feet in an instant, a low, rumbling growl building in his chest. He moved to the mouth of the cave, placing his body between Iris and the world, a living shield of muscle and magic. Iris's heart hammered against her ribs. The old fear, the ingrained instinct to submit to her alpha, rose up in her, cold and cloying. A part of her wanted to run out to him, to soothe the savage beast she could feel raging just beyond the ivy curtain. But as she looked at the magnificent, scarred guardian standing sentinel for her, she knew that life was over. She had chosen a new path, a new protector, a new home. The crashing of undergrowth grew louder. A large body slammed against the rock face near the entrance. A guttural snarl, filled with rage and possession, echoed into the cave. "Iris!" The voice was barely human. It was the sound of Corin's wolf tearing its way through his control. Shadow answered with a roar that shook the very stones of the cave. It was a sound of ancient territorial fury, a challenge from one king to another. "She is not yours." Iris scrambled to her feet, her hands clenched into fists. She would not hide behind her guardian. This was her fight. She had to face the man who had broken her, the ghost who had haunted her for a decade. She moved to stand beside Shadow, her small human form a stark contrast to his massive, powerful one. She pushed aside the heavy curtain of ivy and stepped out into the rain-swept twilight. Corin stood there, not 10 feet away. He was in his human form, but only just. His eyes were wild, his features contorted with a primal fury. Rain plastered his dark hair to his skull, and his fine royal tunic was torn and smeared with mud. He looked like a fallen king, a beast brought to its knees. His scent was overwhelming, a storm of rage, grief, and a desperate, possessive need that was aimed entirely at her. When his wild eyes fell on her, they widened in shock, and then his gaze shifted to the giant wolf standing at her side, to the way she stood near it without fear, her hand resting on its fur. A look of pure, agonizing betrayal crossed his face. It was the same look she must have worn in the great hall when she saw Rena in her chair. "What is this?" he growled, his voice a ragged tear in the fabric of the night. "What is that thing?" "He is my protector," Iris said, her voice clear and strong, ringing with a power she had never known. It was the voice of the forest, the voice of her own awakened magic. "I am your protector," Corin roared, taking a staggering step forward. "You are my mate, my queen. You belong to me." "I belong to no one," she replied, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous calm. "The woman who belonged to you died in your fortress. She died when you filled her home with the scent of another. She died when you put another in her chair. You are mourning a ghost, Corin." He stared at her, his chest heaving. He saw the change in her. He saw the new strength in her eyes, the wildness that clung to her like a second skin. He saw the woman she had become without him, and it was breaking him. Rena is nothing," he choked out, the words sounding like a lie even to his own ears. "It was a mistake, a political necessity. I needed an heir. I never meant to." "You meant to erase me," she finished for him, her voice devoid of heat. It was a simple statement of fact. "And you succeeded. So now you must live with the consequences. Go back to your fortress, your new Omega, and your heir. Your kingdom needs you." "I need you," he howled, the sound raw, broken. He took another step, his hand outstretched. Shadow moved, a blur of black fur and silent fury. He didn't attack. He simply placed himself directly in Corin's path, his massive head lowered, a growl vibrating in his chest that was a promise of death. Corin froze. He was an alpha king, perhaps the most powerful shifter of his generation, but he was facing something older, something he did not understand. He could see the raw, untamed magic rolling off the great wolf in shimmering waves. He could feel its absolute, unshakable claim on the woman behind it. He was defeated. He looked at Iris one last time, his storm-gray eyes filled with a desolation that mirrored her own from that day in the hall. He had had a treasure, a silent one, a queen whose quiet strength was the true anchor of his kingdom, and he had thrown her away for a pretty flower and an empty promise. The truth had finally written itself on his soul, and the scars would be permanent. Without another word, he turned. He did not run. He walked, his shoulders slumped, the aura of the great Alpha King shattered, leaving only a broken, lonely man. He stumbled back into the forest, back toward the life he had chosen. Iris watched him go until the forest swallowed him, just as it had swallowed her. She turned to Shadow, to her guardian, and buried her face in his thick, warm fur. A single hot tear escaped her eye and fell onto his midnight pelt. It was not a tear of sadness, it was a tear of release. The ghost of the queen was finally laid to rest. The home she had so carefully built, the life she had so painstakingly maintained, she had faced it, and she had let it burn. And from the ashes, something new and wild and free was finally ready to be born. The dawn did not break in the Whisperwood. It seeped, a slow silver mist weaving through the black trunks of ancient trees, carrying the scent of damp earth and cold stone. It was a gentle awakening, a breath held and then released. Iris woke to the sound of a heartbeat. It was not her own. It was a slow, deep, steady rhythm that vibrated through the ground, up into her bones. The heartbeat of the forest, the heartbeat of the wolf sleeping at her side. She no longer slept in a hollowed-out root. The cave was their home now, its walls painted with the flickering light of a constant, low-burning fire. Furs gifted by the forest, from animals that had lived full lives and died of old age, made a warm nest on the floor. Her life was a collection of such gifts now. She reached out, her fingers sinking into the thick midnight fur of her guardian. His name was not Shadow. That was a name she had given the darkness. His true name was Lorien, a truth the forest had whispered to her in a dream. The name of the man inside the wolf, the soul of the guardian. He stirred at her touch, a low rumble of contentment in his deep chest. One molten gold eye opened, pinning her with a look of fierce, unwavering devotion. It was a look that had healed every scar Corin had ever left on her soul. Months had passed, or perhaps it was years. Time moved differently here, measured not in the turning of court schedules, but in the phases of the moon and the slow, patient growth of moss on stone. Her hands were no longer the soft, pale hands of a queen. They were capable, calloused from gathering herbs and tending the fire. Her feet, once bound in soft leather slippers, were now bare and sure on the forest floor, able to read the story of the earth through their souls. The magic of the Silent One had bloomed within her. It was not a loud, showy power. It was a quiet, deep knowing. She could feel the thirst of a sapling, the fear of a rabbit as a fox drew near, the deep, dreaming sleep of the bears in their winter dens. She was no longer just in the forest. She was a part of its consciousness. She was its heart. And Lorien, he was its will. She rose, her movements fluid and silent, and went to the mouth of the cave. The silver mist swirled around her ankles. She breathed it in, the taste of it clean and wild on her tongue. She no longer thought of the fortress. The memories of that life were like a story read in a book long ago, about a sad, lonely girl who did not know who she was. The pain was gone, burned away in the fire of her becoming. Sometimes a cold wind would blow from the east, from the direction of the Ashen Throne. It would carry a faint metallic scent, the scent of a joyless crown, of cold iron, of regret. On that wind, she could sometimes feel a flicker of a broken bond, the echo of a howl from a king who had built a new kingdom of gilded emptiness with his rose-scented queen. It did not touch her. It could not reach her here. Lorien came to stand beside her, his massive form a solid, warm presence in the cool dawn. He nudged her hand with his nose, and the touch was more than a touch. It was a conversation. She felt his thoughts not as words, but as images, feelings, a flash of pride, a deep, abiding sense of peace, the image of a soaring eagle, its wings spread wide against a clear blue sky. "You are free," his soul said to hers. "We are free," she answered, her hand resting on the scarred plane of his face. She looked into his golden eyes and saw the man within. She did not need him to take a human form. She had no desire for that. The bond they shared was deeper than skin, more profound than physical shape. They were two halves of a single soul, a perfect, unique whole. He was the beast, and she was the keeper of his heart. He was the wild magic, and she was the anchor that gave it purpose. She had been an Omega born to be a sacrifice, a barren queen meant to be discarded, a wolfless woman destined to be broken. The world had been wrong. Her purpose was not to serve a king of men. It was to be the heart of a kingdom of trees and shadows, of ancient magic and wild things. Lorien leaned his great weight against her, and she did not stumble. She was rooted here, strong, unbreakable. The first rays of the sun pierced the canopy, turning the silver mist to gold. A new day, a new life, a life she had not been given, but had seized with her own two hands. He was the forest, she was its heart, and under the silver dawn, their two broken souls became one kingdom,